Robert Shed Log, Sunday 17th of May 2020. Hello, I'm Robert and welcome to my shed. So this week I was going to do a whole section on grooves and slots of various kinds. Unfortunately, I hit my hand with a chisel, and so I'm not really able to do much at the moment because I can't move this finger. So I thought it'd be a good idea to start off with why this happened and indeed how to use a chisel safely. This piece of wood hasn't moved in the vise since I did my injury, and I want to just explain why it happened and what I should have done differently, as well as how to use a chisel safely. So I want to cut a groove, a side grain groove, into this end of the wood. Okay, so to do that, I've been using various different tools, but I've been doing it with a piece of wood horizontally in the vise to work on this end, where it's overhanging, and at this weird angle to work on this end, because it lets me get to the whole piece of wood, it lets me get to this side to reference off. That seemed like a good idea. So what happened was I was using this 1/2 inch chisel on this 1/4 inch groove, and I used a chisel with a mallet to mark out the edges of the groove, which went absolutely fine. And then I started trying to pare out the knotted wood in here to get past the knot. And that kind of went okay at first, but I hit a very tough bit, and so I ended up pushing the chisel on this side. I still have my must be my first finger pushing down on the chisel. You see the problem. The middle finger is right over this chisel. If this is going to move at an abrupt angle, it's going to do that. And it did. And it hit me in the middle finger, just below the joint. And that was a problem. What I should have done, first of all, I should have lain it out on the vise flat to deal with the groove. Because that way, I'm working downwards, and things are not likely to fly up and out. Secondly, preparing, you should always hold the blade in one hand and push down on the blade with the other hand, keeping all the other fingers well out of the way. Now, I don't like pushing down on this wood at this angle because it moves. So I was using far more force on my right hand than my left, and that's bad. You need to push down the hand on the front of the blade because that's what gives you the force that keeps the blade against the wood. So basically, always make sure you're chiseling away from yourself. If you have a small piece, don't think it's going to be easy. Small pieces have horrible bits of knots in them and you can't do much with. And it's when you get complacent and think things are easy, that's when mistakes happen. And yes, I'm very lucky. This wound, I've got full sensation in my fingers, and I can, before the bandage went on, I could quite happily make a fist or straighten my fingers out. Right now this is holding everything in place so I can't move my fingers. That's just so I don't damage the joint while the cut while it's healing. That's not because of any worse injury that could easily have happened. Finally, last but very much not least, keep your tools sharp. This was a clean cut. This will heal. If this had been a blunt chisel, I would have been using more force because blunt chisels cut less well, and I would have risked tear out, both on the wood and when the accident happened, on my finger. That would have been bad in terms of the level of injury. So I'm not going to go into any more gory details than that, and I'm not going to dwell on this any further, but I want to just explain what a slot is, or what a groove is, and what different types of slots there are in wood, because frankly, that's what I was going to be talking about anyway, and it's really a lot more complicated than it needs to be. So let's demystify grooves and rebates and rabbets and housings and dadoes and other terms I had to look up because I didn't know what anyone was talking about. So this is a groove. You'll typically see this on say a side of a drawer. This would be the side of the drawer, and the base of the drawer is slot into this groove. This allows you to get to this piece of side grain along here, which is good for gluing. So you end up with a reasonably strong joint, provided you're gluing the wood using a groove. That will install the book base to a drawer to stop things falling out of it. Grooves always run along the grain. That means you can very easily cut them out using a variety of tools, because when you cut out this bit, this end, the rest of it's just going to have to tear out, pretty much. You've got a little bit of work to do to stop it tearing out on the sides. Now, when you have another piece of wood like this one, you're cutting across the grain. A little less deep than that. You have a slot going across the grain. That's known as a housing or housing joint. Or in American English, that's known as a dado. So you'll see tools like dado planes, for example. It's specifically designed to do this. The housing is typically mostly used in bookcases. So this would be the side of the bookcase, and this would be where the shelf connects, or this is the base of the bookcase, and this would be where the back connects, the back paneling. And you'll notice here it's not a through joint. I've drawn this as a blind joint so that you get the uninterrupted piece of wood here, and when the shelf connects along here, all you see is a shelf floating mysteriously on the side. Although in fact, you've got all the side grain, lovely side grain again, and this lovely side grain, top grain, all of which glues really well. So that's really nice in terms of glue up. Although probably this top grain is going on to end grain, so it's not going to do as much as the side grain is. Unless your shelf runs with the grain this way. Technically speaking, a housing joint is this plus the thing connecting into it. A joint is where two pieces of wood join. So this is the housing, put the shelf in, and then it's a housing joint. Finally, we have the rebate, which in America is spelt like this. I'm led to believe it's still supposed to be pronounced rebate, but in some places they pronounce that rabbet. So sometimes I hear about people cutting rabbets in wood. They don't mean, they usually mean making a nice picture of a rabbit. They usually mean just cutting on the side of a piece of wood. So why might you do this? Well, generally it's when you're wanting to join two pieces of wood together to make it look nice. So when this shelf goes into this housing, you don't necessarily want the shelf to stop half an inch from the base. You want the shelf to keep going, and that means you just cut out a blind rebate on this section of wood, half inch or whatever. And that cutout would be known as a rebate. Other reasons you might do it, putting inserts in. If you've got two pieces of wood joining, 4 pieces of wood joining an angle, you might have a rebated top, so on top of box walls, for instance, so the box lid can sit in flush. and so on. So how do you cut them? Well, if you're cutting a groove, a through groove, or even a through housing, there's a wonderful tool called a router that will do it for you. This router is a power tool using a spinning cutting disc that will insert itself into the joint, into the cutout, and you simply move it side to side to cut out the line, using a fence to hold it in position, and you keep going repeatedly until you've got to the depth that you want it at. Routers are relatively modern way. The original way of doing it was to use a plane, or even a hammer and chisel. Obviously you can cut any joint with a hammer and chisel, but be careful please. A plough plane is a particular type of plane that is designed to cut grooves. It's a fence that sits against the back wall. It has a very narrow blade on a well, it's basically a rabbet plane, or rebate plane. And that moves away from the fence a certain distance and lets you cut the slot. A rebate plane, of course, is simply a plane where the blade goes to the full width of the, usually a narrow plane where the blade goes to the full width of the plane, which means you can cut out rebates very easily because you just need to push it alongside the wood, fence on one side or the other. A fence being something that extends below the bottom of the plane to give you a reference edge so your tool's in the right place. Housings are a bit more tricky. You can't cut a housing with a plough plane unless you're very close to the end grain. Typically your housing is going to be somewhere in the middle of a piece of wood, particularly if it's a decorative insert piece. But various other reasons it might be. Now obviously you can cut a housing with a hammer and chisel again, but another tool you can use is a router plane. Router plane is the blade is somewhat like the blade of a rabbet plane, although it tends to go through a right angle. And the frame of a router plane is wider. So the router plane lets you get into housings and grooves and so on, and for the most part works at a certain depth. So you probably cut the housing joint with a hammer and chisel, and use the router plane to clean up the base. Similarly, you can use a router plane to cut a groove. You can also use it to cut a tenon and make sure the tenon is the same depth all the way along relative to the piece of wood. I quite like router planes. Some of the more advanced ones you can put fences on, so you can do grooves and possibly near the edge housings and actually sink them all the way, which is really nice because it's so much nicer to use a plane than it is to use chisel once you practice a bit. So yeah, I've been sinking a lot of grooves this past week in preparation for the rest of the material arriving to do my tool store, which should be happening next week with any luck. Touch wood. But we'll see. But that's all I've got time to talk about this week. I think we've been a bit slower than I planned to. I was going to do a demonstration of cutting sinking a groove. But I don't want to do that with my injury, so that's going to have to wait for next week as well. Hopefully by which time I'll be in a better position to do so. Well, that's all I have to talk about today, so ta-ta!